One of the biggest threats to bats coming from a new disease that's called white nose syndrome, and it's wiping out hibernating bats in North America. It's actually caused the death of over 5.5 million bats. White nose syndrome was first discovered by scientists in 2007, and it was named for the white fuzzy fungus that grows on the bat's muzzle, wings, and tail membranes. The disease is caused by a fungus called Geomyces destructans. We didn't even know that this fungus existed before bats started getting sick with white nose syndrome. The fungus only grows in cold, humid environments like caves and mines where bats hibernate, and it won't grow above about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So our body temperatures and our pets and livestock, we're just too warm for the fungus, so we're really not at risk from this disease. But if you remember a little bit ago when I was talking about hibernation, I told you that the bat's body temperature drops really low to right around the cave temperature when they're hibernating. So they're down at about 55 degrees, which is just the right temperature for this fungus to start growing. And the fungus actually grows down into the bat's living tissue and causes the bats to wake up while they're hibernating and burn through their fat reserves, and they go out of the hibernacula in search of food and water. And it's winter, so there's really not any insects around. A lot of the water is frozen, and most bats will freeze or starve to death. And death rates from this disease are really high. Excuse me. Scientists have documented up to 100% death rates at some sites in the Northeast in the U.S. And so far, 6 kinds of bats have had the disease out of the 46 kinds of bats that live in the United States. But there are 26 kinds of bats that depend on hibernation to survive the winter, so it's possible that all of those types of bats here in the U.S. are going to be at risk from this disease if it gets into their hibernacula. We do know that bats could spread the disease to each other, but we also think that the people can probably spread the fungus too. So scientists have found the spores of the fungus on the clothing and footwear and gear of people that go into and leave caves and mines that have been infected with white nose syndrome. So one way we can try to control that is by limiting access to caves and mines where we might be able to prevent the accidental spread of the disease by people carrying the fungus a lot further than bats can take it themselves. Scientists and cave explorers should always decontaminate their clothing and their footwear and gear to reduce the accidental transportation of the fungus. Scientists have also learned a lot about white nose syndrome recently. We've just discovered that the disease likely probably came from Europe, where bats don't seem to be affected by it. So there's some hope that bats in the U.S. may develop some sort of resistance to the disease. So what does it matter if we lose all these bats? Well, as Rob mentioned, bats are the primary predator of night-flying insects. They're also really important for pollination and natural pest control. So without all these insectivorous bats, farmers and foresters will have to apply a lot more pesticides, which cost money and can also be toxic to humans and the environment. Many animals in cave environments, including fish, crustaceans, amphibians, and insects, depend on bats to bring nutrients into the cave in their droppings, which are called guano. And bats are also really important to science and medicine. We study bats to create new technologies and new medicines. And lastly, bats are pretty cool. Watching bats flying around at night is really amazing. And